Okay. So, good afternoon. My name is Angela Lucero. I am the Scholarly Communication Librarian at UTEP, and today's workshop is called Make Your Work Easy to Find and Cite. Let's get started. So, I just want to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Angela Lucero. Like I said, I'm the Scholarly Communication Librarian at UTEP. I've been a librarian for 9 years, and I work specifically with political science, public administration, and the rehabilitation sciences. And so let's just talk about, why we're even thinking about this. Why are we concerned about making our work easy to find and to cite? This might concern you if you have work, but it doesn't get read or cited often. Obviously, you feel like your work is important. You want people to read it. Um, I think that if you have this experience where you have a lot of output that's outside of traditional peer-reviewed publication or conventional publishing, and you want to make that work visible, you can apply some of these methods to make your work easier to find and to cite. And I think also another signal that maybe you need to take some sort of measure to make your work easier to find would be, if you receive emails fairly often asking for a copy of your work because they can't because people can't find something that you published. You can take steps to improve all of these things, and you can do it independently. And I believe that it will not only result in your work being easier to find, but people will read it and cite it, and it'll contribute to the literature, to research. So at the end of the workshop, you will know about some social network profiles that can help your academic reputation. You'll learn about different research ID systems and which we recommend. And you'll also learn about ScholarWorks, which is our institutional repository at UTEP, and how that can help make your work easier to find and cite. So that's our roadmap for today. So we're going to accomplish this by making you as an author, as a researcher, easier to find, and by putting your work in one place or as few places as possible, just kind of giving it a central location. So first we can think about making yourself easier to find. So I think that what questions people have, when they're reading work, and maybe they want to, or maybe when they see a person's name attached to work, they think, is this person real? Who are they? What are their qualifications? And if they really like you, what other work have they done? That's why you want to that's why you want to be easy to find as a researcher. And there are issues about, concerns, legitimate concerns to be had about privacy, but making yourself easier to find on the internet, at least as far as your work goes, can be really productive overall for your reputation and your networking and things like that. So you can use social media sites, different their academic and professional ones, to make yourself easier to find. And just a moment, I have to step away for just a second. So these are some social media platforms that you can use as a researcher that might make it easier for yourself to be for people to identify you. So when in my experience, when I have done an internet search or Google search for the name of a researcher or an author of a paper, just trying to figure out what else they've done, what's their affiliation, what comes up pretty often is their LinkedIn profile. Um, Maybe their ResearchGate or their academia.edu profile. And so LinkedIn and ResearchGate and academia.edu, those are all, for they're owned by private companies, and I think that the same privacy issues that exist with other social media exist there. Um, and so we have to approach those with caution, but we do know that a lot of people are on these networks, and it makes it easy to put just the basic facts of your affiliation, your qualifications on the internet really easily in a way that people can find and connect to. There are also these other platforms. So there's Impact Story, there's Mendeley. I know that a lot of academics are on Twitter. I read recently an article about how academia is on TikTok. So you can use any social media platform to promote your work and to talk more about your work. These are some of the more professional and academic ones. The one I want to talk about in particular is not so much social media, but I do believe that this will make you easier to find. So if you can make yourself a Google Scholar profile, you'll make yourself easier to find, and you can also connect yourself to your work. Um, I'm a librarian, and I'm so when I do a search for for literature, when I'm looking for articles or looking at the research for anything, I typically use a database, but I also use Google Scholar, and the data that we have at the library tells us that most people are finding their ways to articles through Google Scholar. So we know everyone's using Google Scholar. You can leverage Google Scholar to help you. So it'll make you easier to find and also easier for a person to find all of your work. So what you can do is you can make your scholar profile. You can claim the publications that are listed in Google Scholar's results. You'll verify that you're a real person and that the information about you is true using your UTEP email. And you can even add a photo to your profile and a homepage. So I don't know if you might have a personal or a professional homepage that you'd like to share, or maybe it's just your faculty profile at UTEP, but just some way to connect with you, some other way to connect with you. And so I'd like to show an example of someone from UTEP who is using Google Scholar, and it's really benefiting them. So this is Professor Kranovich from computer science. Now they haven't added a photo, and that's okay because we know that they're verified, and we can see the link here, University of Texas at El Paso. Um, Check it out. They've linked to a homepage. It looks like they linked to the computer science page at UTEP, and they list what their specialties are, what they really focus on in their research. If they have social media accounts, I noticed that there's also a space for that for some people. And then look, since they created their Google Scholar profile, and they've clearly claimed all of their work, we can scroll down and see all of these articles that Dr. Krenovich has written. This is really useful. If someone discovers one of their articles and says, "What else has this person written? Are they an expert on this?" Really easy to find all of your work. Another advantage you get from creating a Google Scholar profile is you get Google Scholar metrics attributed to you and your work, or that are attached to you and your work. So, total access, I'm sorry, total articles that you have listed in Google Scholar, how many times they've been cited, this measurement called the H index, which just kind of talks about, also how many times you've been cited. Um, and you can use those to describe the effectiveness of your work, or describe your readership. And you can also use that in tenure and promotion, um, for tenure and promotion purposes. So if you're only going to do one thing, that I recommend in this workshop today, I really recommend setting up your scholar profile. You can always direct there, if you're on Twitter or on academia.edu, and you say, go read my work, here's a link to my scholar profile. It's a really great way to connect people to your work just in one go. Oh, and then I should probably just make a note on how you would do that. I mean, you can Google, how do I set up my Google Scholar profile? And there are lots of good instructions. But just in general, you want to go to scholar.google.com, and you'll need to be signed in with a Google account. And then you can go to my profile up here. And if you haven't created your profile yet, it'll walk you through the steps that you need to take to verify your email address, claim all of your work, and enter maybe alternative ways that your name is spelled and things like that. It's a pretty easy process. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, as far as making yourself easier to find, are scholarly IDs. So you can think of a scholarly ID kind of like your driver's license number or an ISBN for you as a researcher. And so this really helps tackle name ambiguity. So if you have a middle initial, or if you have a family name that changed after marriage, it can account for all of these things, because you have one number sequence attached to you, and that's how you identify yourself in the research. It also helps other people find your work. If they know one of your scholarly IDs, it's a way that you can. It's another way that you can list your work. So this is really important for, I just say, for conquering name ambiguity. So here are some examples of scholarly IDs. There's the researcher ID, and I think this was probably one of the, I guess I'll call it the legacy ones, maybe one of the older ones. This is the researcher ID. And so the researcher ID does exactly the things that I just described. Um, and it's for use in Web of Science publications. I have seen that other journals will accept a researcher ID, but you really search by, a researcher ID is like a product, that you use in this one product, Web of Science. And so you can search by researcher ID, or click on researcher ID to go to that person's page where it will show all of those works and things like that. It can help, having a researcher ID in Web of Science can really help, again, conquer name ambiguity. So if you're using Web of Science for to do a citation analysis or analysis of your work, um, having a researcher ID will make sure that all of the publications attributed to you are actually being counted in the analysis it can perform for you. So the one below it is the Scopus author ID, which is an Elsevier product. And so this one is for use in on Elsevier platforms. So we think Science Direct, Scopus, the Scopus proper, things like that. The Scopus author ID. And I'll go ahead and show you just kind of what both of those look like. So if you wanted to set up your researcher ID, um, you can just do an internet search for um, Web of Science Researcher ID, and it shows you instructions for how to create it or how to register, and how to and just kind of the benefits of what's there. It looks like they're tying it into their platform called Publons now, which is another like researcher verification sort of social media site. So that's what's going on with Researcher ID. And then I can't show a really great preview of what you have to do in Scopus, because UTEP is not doesn't have Scopus access, so this is just a preview. Um, but you can just search for the author feedback wizard, and once you sign in or create your account, and you can do this whether or not we have access to Scopus, you can go through this wizard, which will collect your information and help you identify your publications, which are listed or indexed in Scopus. And so this will also help you, if you're trying to do any analysis of your work or citations in Scopus. It'll help you by eliminating name ambiguity, making sure that everything is yours that is yours is attributed to you. Now this is the one um, that I'm going to recommend in this workshop. If you only buy into one scholarly ID, I'm going to recommend the ORCID ID. The reason I recommend this is because you can use an ORCID anywhere. It's not tied to a specific platform or company, like Scopus was tied to Elsevier and Researcher ID is tied to Web of Science. This one you can use anywhere. It's publisher neutral. And so you can actually, if you have a researcher ID or a Scopus ID, you can tie that to your ORCID ID. And the ORCID ID is just, it's more versatile. So wherever you're submitting, I think once your article is accepted and they want you to, make your author profile or enter your author information, you can enter your ORCID, that ID. And so UTEP's a member organization now, which is, which comes with benefits for analyzing faculty's work using ORCID, their output. A part of establishing your ORCID is claiming your work. So it's a good way to very quickly take a picture of everything that you're doing. UTEP is working on just onboarding everyone to the ORCID platform, just kind of automating that. But for now, what you can do if you want to create your ORCID ID is you can go to orcid.org, And there are very easy steps that you can take to sign up for your ORCID. It'll ask you to verify your identity using your institutional email, so your utep.edu email, and that's really the only guidance I have to give you. You take this with you and run with it. Um, so again, that's my recommendation for using a scholarly ID, the ORCID ID. Tackle name ambiguity and make sure that everything you have worked on and written, published, is attributed to you. So we've talked about making yourself easy to find. I think another strategy that you can leverage is to make your work easier to find and cite is to put it all in one place. And so when we talked about Google Scholar, we talked about setting up your profile, and then that enables you to claim your work, as it's whatever work is appearing in Google Scholar results, you can claim it. This is mine, I did it. Depending on how you publish or what you have published, that could account for all of your work, and that could be adequate. I don't like to assume that that's the case for everyone. So what the next strategy I think that we need to that I would suggest working on is putting your work all into one place. And I'm going to recommend an institutional repository. And this way, people can see what you published. If you're able to include the full text or just like the actual piece that you wrote or that you created, and that way, if people can read it, they can engage with it, they can cite it, and that's ultimately what you want. A list of what you have done is great. That's a CV, but how do we get to it? And an institutional repository is a great option, because if you have the option to put a preprint or like the official full text of whatever book, chapter, journal article, lecture slides, poster presentation, anything that you made, if you can put the actual object there, you're putting your work in one place, and you're also making it so people can read it and engage with it, cite it, hopefully. UTEP's institutional repository is ScholarWorks at UTEP. Just really, I talked about, kind of why we want to put our work in one place. The benefits of putting our work in ScholarWorks at UTEP, because I know there are lots of options for repositories, disciplinary repositories, and whatnot. The benefits of ScholarWorks at UTEP is that you get a durable, permanent URL for your work, and this way you can put this in your CV. You can you can share this on Twitter or other social media. It's a good link that won't expire. It's got reliable storage. It's a reliable storage solution. We don't have any space limits or format limits. So whatever digital thing you are trying to store that you want to share with people, this repository can handle it. The contents of ScholarWorks at UTEP appear in Google search results. So this is a good way to make any work that maybe isn't already appearing in Google Scholar. This is a good way to make sure that it is popping up in Google Scholar, is putting it in the institutional repository. And another benefit of using ScholarWorks at UTEP are the usage reports, or readership reports as they're called, on the platform. So data about who's using your work, who's read it, where in the world they were when they read it, just in general, not like exact IP or street address, but just in general, where in the world were they? How many people have downloaded it, and also how many people have shared it, and what platform they've shared that link on. So this is useful to you to know, who's reading my work, who's using it, and also perhaps it could be useful for you to share. I know people are reading my work. Here's the data that I collected from this repository where I deposited my work. If you're interested in depositing your work at in ScholarWorks at UTEP, right now you need to email Lisa Weber, the digital resources librarian, and this is her email address on this page, lweber@utep.com. And be I would regret it if I passed up the opportunity to show you ScholarWorks. So it's ScholarWorks at utep.edu. You can also just Google ScholarWorks UTEP. And so if you are an author, people can search for your names. People can also browse by department and things like that. I think that probably fewer people come to the repository to browse and find something than find their way in through internet search result links. So let's see. So I just want to show an example. So it looks like computer science is depositing departmental papers here. And so this is an example of how someone is putting their work in ScholarWorks. So it's coming from the Department of Engineering. These are the authors and their affiliations, and there's a lot of good metadata to describe, the work. And in this case, the full text isn't in the repository, but there's a link out to the full text. So even if you don't have, permission to even if you don't have permission or the rights to your work, that will enable you to put a full text copy like a PDF or something in the repository, we can still put a link to link out. That way your work is still kind of, you can view it all in one place or it's collected in one place. And I believe in readership reports, you would get a count for, this person visited the page for your article. So, at least people are attracted to it. People are finding their way to that page. All right. So putting your work in one place, I recommend ScholarWorks at UTEP, our institutional repository. So just to review before I take any questions that anyone might have, the goal is to make your work easier to find and to cite. So, we want to make it easy for people to find your work and easy for them to read, to access. That way they can engage with it and cite it. So just an overall, my recommendations are set up your Google Scholar profile, claim your work on Google Scholar, get the ORCID ID. That way you can tackle any name ambiguity that might exist with the way your name has been printed in the past, and to put any for any of your work that you possibly can, put a copy in ScholarWorks at UTEP, the institutional repository. That way there's a copy that, regardless of subscription access, or subscriptions or location or anything like that, someone can open it and read it if possible. If not, then at least the link out. So I hope this was helpful. Are there any questions for anyone in attendance? You can email me. My email's on the screen. If you want to attend more workshops from the scholarly communication team at the UTEP Library, I have the link to where you can find our schedule here. So thank you so much for attending.